The four functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting. Understanding the foundation of personality. The four psychological functions represent one of Carl Jung's most profound contributions to understanding human consciousness and personality. These functions describe how individuals perceive information and make decisions about the world around them. Jung believed that every person possesses all four functions but uses them in different proportions and with varying degrees of development. The four functions are divided into two pairs. The first pair consists of the perceiving functions, sensing and intuiting. These functions determine how we gather information from our environment. The second pair comprises the judging functions, thinking and feeling. These determine how we process information and make decisions based on what we've perceived. Understanding these functions provides remarkable insight into why people behave differently in identical situations. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with completely different interpretations, not because one is right and the other wrong, but because they process reality through different functional lenses. This framework helps explain communication breakdowns, relationship conflicts, career satisfaction, and personal growth challenges. Jung observed that one function typically dominates in each person, becoming their primary way of engaging with the world. This dominant function shapes their worldview, decision-making style, and natural strengths. However, the least developed function, which Jung called the inferior function, often operates unconsciously and can be a source of stress and personal challenges. The beauty of understanding these functions lies not in labeling or limiting people, but in recognizing the full spectrum of human experience. Each function offers unique gifts and perspectives. A well-developed person learns to access all four functions appropriately, depending on the situation. This psychological flexibility represents true maturity and wisdom. Throughout history, different cultures have recognized similar patterns in human behavior, though they used different terminology. Ancient Greek philosophy spoke of different temperaments. Eastern philosophies discussed various paths to understanding reality. Modern neuroscience is now discovering biological correlates to these psychological preferences. Jung's framework provides a practical, accessible way to understand these timeless observations about human nature. The four functions are not rigid categories, but fluid dimensions of consciousness. People exist on a spectrum for each function, and these preferences can shift somewhat over a lifetime, particularly through conscious development work. Understanding your functional stack offers a roadmap for personal growth, showing you both your natural strengths and the areas where development would bring greater balance and effectiveness. 2. The thinking function: logic, analysis, and objective truth. The thinking function represents humanity's capacity for logical analysis, objective reasoning, and systematic problem-solving. Individuals who lead with this function approach the world through the lens of truth, consistency, and rational principles. They seek to understand the underlying structure of reality through cause and effect relationships and logical frameworks. Thinking types excel at detaching emotionally from situations to analyze them objectively. When faced with a problem, their first instinct is to break it down into component parts, identify the logical relationships between elements, and construct systematic solutions. They value fairness, consistency, and impartiality. Their decisions are based on whether something makes logical sense rather than how it makes them or others feel. In professional environments, thinking types often gravitate toward fields requiring analytical rigor, such as engineering, computer science, law, mathematics, philosophy, and strategic planning. They bring clarity to complex situations by cutting through emotional noise to identify core issues. Their ability to remain objective under pressure makes them valuable in crisis situations where clear-headed analysis is essential. The thinking function operates through categorization and classification. These individuals naturally create mental frameworks to organize information. They appreciate elegant theories that explain multiple phenomena through simple principles. They're drawn to debates and intellectual discourse, viewing disagreement not as personal conflict but as an opportunity to refine ideas through dialectical examination. However, the thinking function can have shadow aspects when overused or underdeveloped. Thinking-dominant individuals may struggle to recognize the legitimate role of emotions in decision-making. They might inadvertently hurt others' feelings through blunt honesty, failing to recognize that how something is said matters as much as what is said. They can become overly rigid, trying to force messy human situations into logical frameworks that don't quite fit. When the thinking function is poorly developed or repressed, individuals may struggle with analysis paralysis, second-guessing their decisions constantly because they can't achieve perfect logical certainty. They might also develop a pseudo-logical approach, using rational-sounding arguments to justify emotional conclusions rather than following logic where it truly leads. The mature expression of the thinking function recognizes that logic is a tool, not the totality of truth. Advanced thinkers understand that different logical systems can be internally consistent while reaching different conclusions based on their starting axioms. They develop epistemic humility, recognizing the limits of pure reason while still valuing it as an essential way of knowing. Developing the thinking function for those who don't naturally lead with it involves practicing stepping back from immediate emotional reactions to analyze situations more objectively. It means asking, what's the logical consequence of this action, rather than only, how will this make people feel? It involves developing comfort with constructive criticism and debate, recognizing that challenging ideas isn't the same as attacking people. The thinking function at its highest expression combines rigor with wisdom. It recognizes that being right isn't enough. Solutions must also be implementable and acceptable to the people affected by them. Mature thinking types learn to communicate their insights with emotional intelligence, presenting logical arguments in ways that others can hear and integrate rather than defending against. The feeling function. Values, harmony, and subjective meaning. The feeling function represents humanity's capacity to evaluate based on values, importance, and subjective meaning. This is perhaps the most misunderstood of the four functions because the term feeling suggests emotionality, but Jung used it to describe a rational judging process based on values rather than emotions per se. Feeling types approach the world by asking what matters here rather than what's true here. They make decisions based on value hierarchies, considering the human impact of choices and seeking outcomes that align with their deeply held principles. They're attuned to harmony in relationships and naturally sensing when something is off in the emotional atmosphere. In professional settings, feeling types excel in roles requiring interpersonal sensitivity, such as counseling, human resources, teaching, ministry, conflict mediation, and customer service. They bring humanity to organizations, reminding others that systems exist to serve people, not vice versa. Their ability to understand different perspectives makes them excellent at building consensus and creating inclusive environments. The feeling function operates through empathy and value assessment. These individuals can naturally put themselves in others' shoes, understanding motivations and concerns that might not be explicitly stated. They make decisions by considering ripple effects on people and relationships, weighing choices based on alignment with values like compassion, loyalty, authenticity, and justice. Feeling types often have strong aesthetic sensibilities, responding deeply to beauty, art, and meaningful expression. They're drawn to work that has personal significance and contributes to something larger than themselves. They need to feel that their efforts matter, not just that they're technically competent or financially rewarded. However, the feeling function has potential pitfalls when over-relied upon or underdeveloped. Feeling dominant individuals may struggle with necessary but unpleasant decisions, avoiding conflict to preserve harmony even when confrontation would be more helpful. They might take criticism personally, interpreting objective feedback as personal rejection. They can become martyrs, sacrificing their own needs excessively for others. When the feeling function is poorly developed, individuals may struggle to articulate their values clearly or make decisions based on fleeting emotions rather than examined principles. They might confuse personal preference with moral imperative or fail to recognize that different value systems can be equally valid. They may avoid necessary rational analysis because it feels cold or heartless. The mature expression of the feeling function recognizes that values require both conviction and flexibility. Advanced feeling types understand that preserving relationship harmony sometimes requires difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. They develop the ability to disagree with others' choices while still respecting their humanity. They learn to distinguish between emotions and values, recognizing that feelings provide information but shouldn't always dictate decisions. Developing the feeling function for those who don't naturally lead with it involves tuning into the human dimension of situations. It means asking, how will this affect people, alongside, does this make logical sense? It involves developing empathy by actively imagining others' experiences, rather than just analyzing their behaviors. It requires recognizing that subjective meaning and value are real aspects of human experience, not merely obstacles to objective truth. The feeling function at its highest expression creates ethical frameworks that honor both universal principles and particular circumstances. It recognizes that wisdom includes both head and heart, that the most important questions in life often don't have purely logical answers. Mature feeling types become moral leaders who can articulate compelling visions of the good life while remaining humble about the complexity of ethical decision-making. The sensing function: concrete reality and present experience. The sensing function represents humanity's engagement with concrete, tangible, immediate reality. Sensing types are grounded in the here and now, attending to physical sensations, observable facts, and practical details. They trust what can be directly experienced through the five senses and value proven, reliable approaches over theoretical possibilities. Individuals leading with the sensing function have exceptional awareness of their physical environment. They notice details that others miss, the subtle changes in someone's appearance, the quality of materials, the precise sequence of events. They're often described as practical, realistic, and down-to-earth because they focus on what is rather than what might be. In professional contexts, sensing types excel in fields requiring attention to concrete details, such as accounting, surgery, craftsmanship, athletics, emergency response, culinary arts, and quality control. They bring reliability and thoroughness to their work, ensuring that practical considerations aren't overlooked in favor of abstract theories. Their ability to respond effectively to immediate circumstances makes them invaluable in hands-on situations. The sensing function operates through direct observation and concrete experience. These individuals learn best by doing rather than reading about something. They prefer step-by-step instructions and proven methods over abstract theories. They trust tradition and established procedures because these have demonstrated effectiveness over time. They're skeptical of untested ideas and prefer to see evidence before embracing new approaches. Sensing types often have strong aesthetic appreciation for physical beauty and sensory pleasure. They might be excellent cooks who understand food through taste and texture, musicians who focus on technical mastery and tonal quality, or athletes who have exceptional body awareness. They're present to the richness of immediate experience rather than being lost in thought about past or future. However, the sensing function can become limiting when over-relied upon. Sensing-dominant individuals may resist change and innovation, staying too long with what's familiar even when circumstances call for new approaches. They might miss the forest for the trees, becoming so focused on immediate details that they lose sight of larger patterns and future implications. They can be too literal, missing metaphorical meanings and symbolic significance. When the sensing function is poorly developed, individuals may feel disconnected from their physical reality, neglecting bodily needs or being oblivious to their immediate environment. They might lack practical skills and struggle with implementation, having wonderful ideas that never materialize into concrete reality. They may develop addictive relationships with sensory pleasures, seeking intensity of experience without meaning. The mature expression of the sensing function combines present moment awareness with appropriate planning. Advanced sensing types recognize that while being grounded in current reality is essential, this doesn't mean ignoring future possibilities or past lessons. They develop the ability to be fully present without being stuck in the present, honoring immediate experience while remaining open to growth and change. Developing the sensing function for those who don't naturally lead with it involves cultivating mindful presence. It means practicing attention to sensory details, the texture of food, the quality of light, the sensation of breathing. It involves developing practical skills through hands-on practice rather than just reading about them. It requires learning to trust direct experience and observable evidence rather than only abstract theories. The sensing function at its highest expression creates profound appreciation for the gift of physical existence. It recognizes that theories and possibilities ultimately must manifest in concrete reality to have meaning. Mature sensing types become masters of presence, able to be fully engaged with whatever moment they're in while maintaining perspective on larger contexts. The intuiting function: patterns, possibilities, and abstract connections. The intuiting function represents humanity's capacity to perceive patterns, envision possibilities, and grasp abstract meanings beyond immediate sensory data. Intuitive types focus on what could be rather than what is, attending to implications, hidden connections, and future potential. They trust hunches and insights that arise from the unconscious mind. Individuals leading with the intuiting function are constantly scanning for patterns and relationships between seemingly unrelated phenomena. They naturally think symbolically and metaphorically, seeing beyond surface appearances to underlying meanings. They're future-oriented, more interested in where things are heading than where they currently are. They thrive on novelty and innovation, quickly becoming bored with routine or repetitive tasks. In professional environments, intuitive types excel in fields requiring vision and innovation, such as entrepreneurship, research and development, strategic consulting, creative arts, theoretical science, and trend forecasting. They bring imagination and possibility thinking to organizations, helping others see beyond current constraints to what might be achieved. Their ability to synthesize diverse information into novel insights makes them valuable catalysts for innovation. The intuiting function operates through pattern recognition and imaginative projection. These individuals often can't explain exactly how they know something.
They simply perceive connections intuitively. They're drawn to complexity and ambiguity, comfortable with multiple interpretations and open questions. They prefer to understand general principles rather than memorize specific facts, trusting that they can work out details when needed. Intuitive types often have rich inner lives, spending considerable time in imagination and abstract thought. They might be drawn to philosophy, psychology, science fiction, mysticism, or any domain exploring possibilities beyond conventional reality. They're energized by brainstorming and blue sky thinking, generating creative options even if only a fraction will prove practical. However, the intuiting function has potential weaknesses when overused or underdeveloped. Intuitive dominant individuals may neglect practical details and concrete realities, creating visions that can't be implemented or missing obvious obstacles. They might be unreliable about routine tasks, forgetting appointments or practical obligations because they're focused on more interesting abstract matters. They can become so focused on future possibilities that they fail to appreciate present circumstances. When the intuiting function is poorly developed, individuals may struggle to see beyond literal facts to underlying patterns. They might miss important connections and implications, taking things at face value. They may resist imagination and abstract thinking, dismissing insights that can't be immediately verified through concrete evidence. They might become rigid and unable to adapt when circumstances change. The mature expression of the intuiting function balances vision with pragmatism. Advanced intuitive types learn to test their insights against reality, distinguishing genuine intuition from wishful thinking. They develop patience for implementation details, recognizing that even the most brilliant vision must be translated into practical steps. They learn to communicate their insights in concrete terms that more literal-minded people can understand and act upon. Developing the intuiting function for those who don't naturally lead with it involves practicing thinking about possibilities and implications. It means asking, what could this lead to, and what patterns am I seeing, rather than only focusing on immediate facts. It involves engaging with metaphorical and symbolic thinking, recognizing that not all important truths can be stated literally. It requires developing comfort with ambiguity and complexity. The intuiting function at its highest expression enables visionary leadership and creative breakthrough. It recognizes that reality is not fixed, but constantly evolving, that today's impossibilities may become tomorrow's realities. Mature intuitive types become inspiring leaders who can articulate compelling visions of the future while remaining grounded enough to help manifest those visions in concrete reality.
The dynamic relationship between thinking and feeling represents one of the fundamental tensions in human consciousness. These two judging functions offer complementary but often conflicting approaches to decision-making. Understanding how they interact within individuals and between people is crucial for psychological development and interpersonal effectiveness. Both thinking and feeling are rational functions in Jung's framework, meaning they both involve evaluation and judgment rather than mere perception. The difference lies in their criteria. Thinking judges based on logical consistency and objective truth, while feeling judges based on values and subjective importance. Neither is more advanced or mature than the other. They represent different but equally valid ways of reaching conclusions. Individuals typically develop one of these functions more strongly than the other. Those who lead with thinking may struggle to understand feeling types, perceiving them as illogical or overly emotional. Conversely, feeling-dominant individuals may view thinking types as cold, insensitive, or missing the human dimension of situations. These misunderstandings cause countless conflicts in relationships and organizations. The tension between these functions appears in common life dilemmas.
Should you take a higher-paying job that doesn't align with your values, or a meaningful position with less compensation? Should you tell a harsh truth that will hurt someone, or a kind falsehood that preserves harmony? Should you enforce rules consistently even when circumstances suggest flexibility, or make exceptions that may undermine fairness? These questions pit logical considerations against value-based ones. In healthy psychological development, individuals learn to access both functions appropriately. A mature thinking type develops their feeling function enough to recognize when values and human impact should take precedence over pure logic. They learn that being technically right isn't enough if the solution destroys relationships or violates important principles. They develop empathy and interpersonal sensitivity without abandoning their analytical strengths. Similarly, a mature feeling type develops their thinking function enough to make difficult decisions when necessary, even if it causes temporary disharmony. They learn that authentic compassion sometimes requires honest feedback rather than comfortable agreement. They develop analytical skills and objectivity without losing their connection to values and meaning. The integration of thinking and feeling creates what we might call wisdom. Wisdom recognizes that both objective truth and subjective meaning are real and important. It knows when to prioritize logical analysis and when to lead with values. It can make tough decisions without becoming callous and maintain principles without becoming rigid. Organizations benefit enormously from balancing these functions. Teams with both strong thinking and feeling types outperform homogeneous groups because they catch each other's blind spots. The thinking types ensure logical rigor and objective analysis, while feeling types maintain awareness of human impact and organizational values. When these perspectives are truly integrated rather than merely tolerated, organizations make better decisions. The conflict between thinking and feeling also appears in cultural and historical patterns. Western intellectual tradition has often privileged thinking, associating rationality with maturity and dismissing values-based reasoning as primitive or feminine. This imbalance has created systems that are logically sophisticated but ethically questionable. The corrective movement emphasizing emotional intelligence and values represents necessary rebalancing. Personal growth often involves developing the inferior function from this pair. For thinking types, this means learning to tune into their own values and emotions, recognizing feelings as valid information rather than obstacles to clear thinking. For feeling types, it means developing analytical skills and learning to step back from emotional reactions to consider situations more objectively. The highest development involves transcending the dichotomy altogether. Advanced individuals can hold both perspectives simultaneously, recognizing that reality has both objective and subjective dimensions that can't be reduced to each other. They become comfortable with the inherent tension between truth and meaning, using each function to enrich rather than contradict the other. The dynamic relationship between sensing and intuiting. The relationship between sensing and intuiting represents another fundamental polarity in human consciousness. These two perceiving functions offer contrasting approaches to gathering information about reality. Sensing focuses on concrete, observable facts in the present moment, while intuiting focuses on patterns, possibilities, and future implications. Both functions are non-rational in Jung's terminology, meaning they involve perception and information gathering rather than judgment or decision-making. The difference lies in what information is attended to. Sensing notices specific details and immediate realities, while intuiting notices abstract connections and potential meanings. Individuals typically develop one of these functions more strongly than the other. Sensing types may perceive intuitives as impractical dreamers with their heads in the clouds, unreliable about concrete details, and constantly chasing novelty. Intuitive types may view sensing types as unimaginative and stuck in routine, missing the bigger picture and resistant to innovation. These different perceptual modes create communication challenges and mutual incomprehension. The tension between these functions appears in many practical contexts. Should an organization focus on optimizing current operations or investing in future innovations? Should you appreciate what you have now or strive for something better? Should you follow proven methods or experiment with new approaches? These questions reflect the different orientations of sensing and intuiting. In healthy development, individuals learn to access both functions when appropriate. A mature sensing type develops their intuitive function enough to recognize patterns and anticipate future needs. They become able to innovate and adapt without losing their grounding in practical reality. They learn to appreciate abstract ideas and possibilities while maintaining their strength in concrete execution. Similarly, a mature intuitive type develops their sensing function enough to attend to necessary details and current realities. They learn to implement their visions through patient attention to practical steps. They develop appreciation for traditional methods and present moments without losing their imaginative and future-oriented strengths. The integration of sensing and intuiting creates what we might call practical wisdom or grounded vision. This combines present-moment awareness with future orientation, attention to details with recognition of patterns, respect for what is with imagination about what could be. It allows for both steady reliability and adaptive innovation. Relationships between strong sensing and intuiting types can be challenging but highly productive when both perspectives are valued. The sensing partner keeps the intuitive grounded in reality and attentive to practical necessities, while the intuitive partner helps the sensing type see beyond immediate circumstances to larger patterns and future possibilities. When mutual respect exists, these differences become complementary rather than conflictual. Organizations similarly benefit from balancing these functions. Companies dominated by sensing types may be reliable and efficient but struggle to innovate or anticipate market shifts. Organizations dominated by intuitive types may be creative and visionary but struggle with execution and practical implementation. The most successful organizations integrate both perspectives, valuing steady improvement of current operations alongside exploration of future possibilities. Cultural contexts influence which function is more valued. Traditional, stable societies tend to reward sensing qualities like respect for proven methods and attention to detail. Rapidly changing, innovative cultures tend to reward intuitive qualities like adaptability and vision. Neither approach is inherently superior. Effectiveness depends on circumstances. Personal growth often involves developing the inferior function from this pair. For sensing types, this means practicing thinking about implications and possibilities, engaging with abstract concepts, and developing comfort with ambiguity and change. For intuitive types, it means practicing mindful presence, developing practical skills through hands-on experience, and learning to value routine and tradition. The highest development involves what we might call integrated perception, the ability to see both what is and what could be, to attend to both specific details and larger patterns, to be present to current reality while remaining open to future possibilities. This represents a mature relationship with both the concrete and abstract dimensions of existence. The concept of dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior functions. Jung observed that the four functions don't operate with equal strength in any individual. Instead, they form a hierarchy within each person's psyche. Understanding this functional stack provides profound insight into personality dynamics, personal development challenges, and the path towards psychological wholeness. The dominant function is the psychological tool we use most naturally and effectively. It's our primary mode of engaging with the world, our most developed skill, and the lens through which we initially interpret experiences. We trust this function implicitly and return to it under stress. For someone with dominant thinking, logical analysis is their default response to challenges. For someone with dominant feeling, value-based evaluation comes most naturally. The auxiliary function serves as a supporting role to the dominant. Importantly, Jung noted that the auxiliary comes from the opposite pair from the dominant. If your dominant function is a judging function, thinking or feeling, your auxiliary will be a perceiving function, sensing or intuiting, and vice versa. This provides necessary balance, ensuring that you both gather information and make decisions, rather than overdeveloping one at the expense of the other. The tertiary function is less developed than the dominant and auxiliary, but more accessible than the inferior. It often emerges more fully in midlife as people seek greater balance and completeness. The tertiary function is from the same pair as the auxiliary, but opposite in some respects, providing another avenue for growth and capability. The inferior function is the least developed and most unconscious of the four. It's opposite to the dominant function. If you lead with thinking, your inferior function is feeling. If you lead with sensing, your inferior function is intuiting. The inferior function represents both our greatest vulnerability and our greatest potential for growth. It operates primitively and can overwhelm us under stress, yet developing it is key to psychological maturity. This hierarchical arrangement explains many personality dynamics. People naturally gravitate toward activities and environments that allow them to use their dominant and auxiliary functions. A person with dominant intuiting and auxiliary thinking will thrive in roles requiring strategic analysis and innovative thinking, but may struggle in roles demanding detailed execution and interpersonal harmony. The inferior function creates a peculiar phenomenon Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for things to transform into their opposites. When we rely too heavily on our dominant function, the inferior function can erupt in primitive, overwhelming forms. A highly rational thinking type might experience irrational emotional outbursts. A grounded sensing type might suddenly become captivated by bizarre conspiracy theories. These eruptions signal that the psyche is demanding attention to neglected aspects of experience. Understanding your functional stack provides a roadmap for development. In youth, the focus is typically on developing the dominant and auxiliary functions, establishing competence and identity. In midlife, psychological growth involves integrating the tertiary and especially the inferior function, developing capabilities that were neglected earlier but are necessary for wholeness. Developing the tertiary function is usually more accessible than developing the inferior. It provides a bridge toward the inferior function, allowing gradual development rather than overwhelming confrontation with our weakest area. For someone with dominant thinking and auxiliary sensing, developing tertiary intuiting can eventually provide access to inferior feeling. The inferior function often holds tremendous energy and potential precisely because it's been neglected. When we begin consciously developing it, we often discover unexpected passions and capabilities. The highly logical person who develops their feeling function might discover profound capacity for empathy and ethical leadership. The practical sensing type who develops intuiting might uncover surprising creativity and vision. However, developing the inferior function requires patience and humility. We can't expect to achieve the same sophistication with our inferior function that we have with our dominant. The goal isn't to become equally skilled in all functions, but to develop each sufficiently that it enriches rather than undermines our life. A thinking type doesn't need to become as emotionally sophisticated as a feeling type, but they do need to develop enough emotional awareness to not sabotage their relationships and well-being. The process of integrating all four functions is essentially the process of individuation that Jung described, becoming a whole person rather than a one-sided caricature. This doesn't mean losing our natural strengths or distinctive personality. Relationships and communication. Understanding the four functions transforms how we navigate relationships and communication. Many conflicts arise not from bad intentions, but from fundamentally different ways of processing reality. When we recognize that others are operating from different functional perspectives, we can bridge gaps that previously seemed insurmountable. Consider a relationship between a thinking type and a feeling type. The thinking partner might say something like, "Your plan has several logical flaws," intending to be helpful by identifying problems. The feeling partner hears this as criticism and personal rejection, responding emotionally in ways that the thinking partner finds irrational. The thinking partner then becomes more adamantly logical to counter what they perceive as emotional unreasonableness, while the feeling partner becomes more emotionally intense because they feel unheard. This negative spiral is entirely predictable based on functional differences. The solution isn't for one partner to abandon their natural function, but for both to develop some capacity with their non-preferred function. The thinking partner needs to recognize that how they present logical analysis matters as much as the analysis itself. They can learn to lead with acknowledgement of the feeling partner's efforts and values before offering critiques. The feeling partner needs to recognize that logical feedback isn't personal attack and can develop some emotional distance to consider critiques more objectively. Sensing and intuiting differences create different relationship challenges. The sensing partner wants to focus on current realities and practical concerns, paying bills, managing household tasks, planning concrete near-term activities. The intuitive partner wants to discuss future possibilities, abstract ideas, and larger meanings. The sensing partner might feel that the intuitive is irresponsible and unreliable, always chasing new ideas while neglecting present responsibilities. The intuitive might feel that the sensing partner is boring and limiting, too focused on mundane details to appreciate life's bigger possibilities. Successful relationships between different functional types require mutual respect and conscious effort to meet each other's needs. The couple doesn't need to become identical in their processing styles, but they do need to create space for both perspectives. Perhaps they alternate between practical planning sessions that satisfy the sensing partner and imaginative brainstorming sessions that energize the intuitive partner. They learn to translate between their different languages. Communication styles vary dramatically based on dominant functions. Thinking types tend to communicate to convey information and solve problems. They appreciate directness, brevity, and logical organization. They might email bullet points rather than calling. Feeling types communicate to create connection and share subjective experience. They appreciate storytelling, emotional expression, and reading between the lines. They might call rather than email because they value the relational aspect of communication. These different communication preferences create misunderstandings. A feeling type might interpret a thinking type's brief logical email as cold or uncaring when the thinking type simply thought they were being efficient and clear. A thinking type might interpret a feeling type's lengthy narrative as inefficient and off-topic when the feeling type is establishing relational context they consider essential. Sensing and intuiting differences affect communication as well. Sensing types prefer specific, concrete language with clear examples and step-by-step explanations. They want to know exactly what happened in what sequence. Intuitive types prefer conceptual, abstract language focused on patterns and implications. They skip over details to get to the main point and meaning. When a sensing boss asks an intuitive employee what happened at the meeting, the employee might answer, "It went well. I think we're moving in the right direction and there's good energy around the project." This answer frustrates the sensing boss, who wants to know specifically who said what decisions were made, and what the next concrete steps are.
Meanwhile, the intuitive employee is frustrated by the boss's focus on what they consider tedious details when the important thing is the overall direction and potential. Effective communication across functional differences requires code switching, adjusting your communication style to match your audience's preferred function. A thinking type communicating with a feeling type should include emotional context and personal impact, not just logical analysis. A feeling type communicating with a thinking type should organize their points logically and separate emotional reactions from objective observations. Similarly, an intuitive communicating with a sensing type should provide concrete examples and specific details, not just abstract concepts. A sensing type communicating with an intuitive should explain larger patterns and future implications, not just immediate facts. Conflict resolution approaches differ dramatically by type. Thinking types want to identify the logical problem and implement a rational solution. They may want to debate the issue thoroughly, viewing disagreement as an opportunity to refine understanding. Feeling types want to repair relational harm and re-establish harmony. They need emotional validation before they can productively discuss solutions. Sensing types want to address immediate practical issues that are causing problems right now. Intuitive types want to understand underlying patterns and prevent future issues. The most effective approach honors all perspectives. Start by acknowledging emotions and relational impact, feeling. Then clearly identify the current practical problem, sensing. Analyze the logical dimensions, thinking, and finally consider patterns and future implications, intuiting. This comprehensive approach satisfies everyone's needs and leads to more robust solutions. Career and professional development. The four functions have profound implications for career satisfaction and professional effectiveness. Understanding your functional strengths helps you identify roles where you'll naturally excel and find fulfillment. Equally important, it helps you recognize the developmental challenges you'll face and strategies for overcoming them. Thinking types gravitate toward careers requiring logical analysis and objective decision-making. They thrive in roles like engineering, programming, law, financial analysis, scientific research, strategic consulting, and systems architecture. These fields reward their ability to analyze complex problems systematically, make decisions based on logical principles, and maintain objectivity under pressure. They find satisfaction in solving intellectual puzzles and creating elegant, efficient systems. However, thinking types may struggle in roles requiring extensive emotional labor or constant interpersonal harmony. They might become frustrated in positions where decisions are made primarily based on politics or personal relationships rather than logical merit. They may need to consciously develop interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence to advance into leadership positions where technical expertise alone is insufficient. Feeling types excel in careers centered on human welfare and meaningful values. They thrive as counselors, teachers, human resources professionals, nonprofit leaders, ministry, social work, and organizational development consultants. These fields reward their ability to understand diverse perspectives, build consensus, and maintain awareness of human impact. They find satisfaction in work that makes a positive difference and aligns with their values. Feeling types may struggle in highly competitive or cutthroat environments where relationships are transactional. They might find it difficult to make tough decisions that hurt people, even when rationally necessary. They may need to develop thicker skin and analytical skills to succeed in business contexts where being liked isn't enough. Sensing types gravitate toward careers involving concrete, tangible results and practical problem solving. They excel as surgeons, accountants, craftspeople, athletes, emergency responders, quality control specialists, and operations managers.
These fields reward their attention to detail, respect for proven methods, and ability to respond effectively to immediate circumstances. They find satisfaction in hands-on work with visible, measurable results. Sensing types may become frustrated in highly theoretical or abstract environments where practical application is distant. They might struggle with ambiguity and constant change. They may need to develop strategic thinking and comfort with innovation to advance into senior leadership positions where vision and adaptability are essential. Intuitive types thrive in careers requiring innovation, vision, and pattern recognition. They excel as entrepreneurs, researchers, strategic planners, designers, artists, psychologists, and futurists. These fields reward their ability to see possibilities others miss, synthesize diverse information into novel insights, and imagine alternative futures. They find satisfaction in work that's constantly evolving and allows creative expression. Intuitive types may struggle with roles requiring sustained attention to routine details. They might become bored with implementation and maintenance once the creative challenge is solved. They may need to develop follow-through and attention to practical constraints to successfully bring their visions to reality. Career development often involves integrating auxiliary and tertiary functions. A thinking sensing type might start in a technical role leveraging both functions, but eventually develop their intuitive function to move into strategic planning. A feeling intuitive type might start in counseling but develop their sensing function to become more effective at practical interventions. The most successful professionals develop sufficient range to adapt to different situations. A venture capitalist with dominant intuiting needs to develop enough sensing to carefully evaluate practical implementation plans, not just exciting visions. A surgeon with dominant sensing needs to develop enough intuiting to anticipate complications and adapt when unexpected situations arise.
Team composition benefits enormously from functional diversity. Teams with only thinking types might create logically perfect solutions that nobody wants to implement because human factors were ignored. Teams with only feeling types might prioritize harmony so much that they avoid necessary difficult decisions. Teams with only sensing types might optimize current operations while missing market shifts. Teams with only intuitive types might generate brilliant innovations that never get implemented due to inattention to practical details. The ideal team has representatives of all four functions who respect each other's contributions. The thinking types ensure logical rigor. The feeling types maintain awareness of values and impact. The sensing types ground discussions in current reality and practical constraints. And the intuitive types push the group to consider future possibilities and creative alternatives. When these perspectives are genuinely integrated rather than merely tolerated, teams make superior decisions. Leadership styles vary dramatically by function. Thinking leaders tend to be task-oriented and strategic, focusing on logical systems and objective metrics. They excel at organizational design and resource allocation, but may need to consciously attend to team morale and individual needs. Feeling leaders tend to be people-oriented and inspirational, focusing on values and relationships. They excel at building cohesive teams and organizational culture, but may need to develop comfort with tough personnel decisions. Sensing leaders tend to be practical and operational, focusing on current performance and incremental improvement. They excel at execution and maintaining quality standards, but may need to develop strategic vision and openness to innovation. Intuitive leaders tend to be visionary and transformational, focusing on future possibilities and paradigm shifts. They excel at inspiring change and spotting opportunities, but may need to develop attention to implementation details and current realities. The most effective leaders develop sufficient range across all functions to meet diverse leadership demands. They lead with their natural strengths while consciously compensating for their functional blind spots, perhaps by surrounding themselves with advisors who complement their style.
Professional development programs often inadvertently favor certain functions over others. Leadership training emphasizing emotional intelligence may resonate with feeling types, while seeming touchy-feely to thinking types. Technical training emphasizing logical analysis may engage thinking and sensing types, while boring intuitive types. The most effective development programs honor diverse learning styles and functional preferences. Career transitions often involve developing previously neglected functions. A successful engineer moving into management needs to develop their feeling function to handle interpersonal dynamics effectively. A counselor starting a private practice needs to develop their thinking function to manage business operations logically. These transitions can be challenging precisely because they demand growth in our weakest areas, but they also offer opportunities for greater psychological wholeness.
Psychological development and integration across the lifespan. The development of the four functions follows predictable patterns across the human lifespan. Understanding these developmental stages helps us recognize where we are in our psychological journey and what growth opportunities lie ahead. Jung believed that psychological maturity involves progressively integrating all four functions, moving from one-sided specialization toward wholeness. In childhood and adolescence, the primary task is developing the dominant function. Children naturally gravitate toward activities that engage their strongest function, and wise parents and educators support this rather than forcing children into uncomfortable functional modes. A young thinking type needs opportunities for logical problem-solving and intellectual challenges. A young feeling type needs environments where values and relationships are honored. A young sensing type needs hands-on, concrete activities. A young intuitive type needs space for imagination and exploration. However, early education systems often favor certain functions over others. Traditional schooling tends to reward sensing-thinking combinations, those who can memorize specific facts and apply logical rules. Intuitive and feeling types may feel that their natural strengths aren't valued, potentially leading to academic struggles despite high intelligence. Understanding functional differences helps educators create more inclusive learning environments. The auxiliary function typically develops during late adolescence and early adulthood. This is when we begin to balance our dominant function with its complement. A young adult with dominant thinking begins developing either sensing or intuiting to balance pure logic with information-gathering capability. This auxiliary development is crucial for functioning effectively in the world. It prevents us from becoming caricatures who can only operate in one mode. Early career years typically involve strengthening both dominant and auxiliary functions. We seek roles that allow us to use our natural strengths while developing supporting capabilities. This is a period of establishing competence and identity. We become known for particular strengths and expertise. A person with thinking sensing becomes the reliable analyst. A person with feeling intuiting becomes the inspiring visionary. However, exclusive focus on dominant and auxiliary functions creates one-sidedness. By our 30s or 40s, many people experience what Jung called the midlife crisis, though it's better understood as midlife transition. The psyche begins demanding attention to neglected aspects of our personality. The highly rational person experiences unexpected emotional turmoil. The practical person becomes fascinated by abstract spirituality. The harmony-focused person suddenly needs to express anger and establish boundaries. This midlife transition is actually an opportunity for growth, not merely a crisis. It signals that the time has come to develop the tertiary and inferior functions. The person who built a successful career on thinking-sensing strengths now needs to develop intuiting and feeling. This doesn't mean abandoning hard-won strengths, but rather adding new dimensions that create greater wholeness and flexibility. Developing the tertiary function in midlife often opens unexpected avenues.
The logical engineer discovers passion for mentoring, developing their feeling function. The practical accountant becomes fascinated by strategic innovation, developing their intuiting function. These developments aren't random. They represent the psyche's drive toward completeness. The inferior function presents the greatest challenge and opportunity. Because it's been most neglected, it operates primitively and can be overwhelming. The highly developed thinking type doesn't experience feeling as mature emotional intelligence, but rather as uncontrolled emotional reactions. The grounded sensing type doesn't experience intuiting as wise pattern recognition, but rather as paranoid suspicions or unrealistic fantasies. Confronting the inferior function requires humility and patience. We must accept being beginners in this domain, experiencing the awkwardness we haven't felt since childhood. The accomplished professional who has mastered complex skills through their dominant function must now stumble through simple exercises in their inferior function.
This can be deeply humbling but ultimately liberating. Paradoxically, the inferior function often holds the key to what Jung called individuation, becoming fully ourselves. The capabilities and perspectives we've most resisted may contain essential elements of our completeness. The rational person who always dismissed emotions discovers that developing emotional awareness doesn't undermine their intellect, but rather enriches it, adding depth and humanity to their logical clarity. Later adulthood, from the 50s onward, ideally involves integration and wisdom. We've now developed all four functions to some degree, though never equally. We can flexibly access whichever function a situation calls for. We've made peace with our inferior function, no longer threatened by it, but also realistic about its limitations. We've integrated the opposites within ourselves, becoming whole rather than one-sided. This integration manifests as wisdom, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to recognize that different approaches are appropriate for different situations. The wise person can be logical without being cold, emotional without being irrational, practical without being unimaginative, visionary without being impractical. They've transcended rigid identification with any single function. However, this development isn't automatic with age. Many people simply become rigid versions of their younger selves, more one-sided rather than more integrated. Genuine development requires conscious effort and willingness to venture into uncomfortable territory. It requires acknowledging our limitations and blind spots, seeking feedback from people who see the world differently, and deliberately practicing our weak areas. Psychological development is never complete. Even in later life, we continue discovering new dimensions of ourselves and new capabilities. The four functions provide a map for this lifelong journey, showing us both where we've been and where we might yet go. The goal isn't perfection, but rather progressive wholeness, becoming more fully human by embracing the full range of human consciousness. Transcending the functions towards psychological wholeness and integration. The ultimate purpose of understanding the four functions isn't to categorize ourselves or others into fixed types, but rather to recognize the full spectrum of human consciousness and work toward integrating all modes of experience. Jung believed that psychological maturity involves transcending one-sided identification with our dominant functions to achieve greater wholeness. This final stage represents the deepest levels of human development. The process of transcending the functions begins with recognizing that each function offers only a partial view of reality. Thinking reveals logical truths but misses subjective meanings. Feeling reveals values and importance, but can obscure objective facts. Sensing reveals present concrete reality, but misses future possibilities. Intuiting reveals patterns and potentials, but can neglect current actuality. None of these perspectives is complete. Each illuminates certain aspects while leaving others in shadow.
When we identify too strongly with our dominant function, we mistake our partial perspective for the whole truth. The thinking type believes that logic can solve all problems. The feeling type believes that values should always take precedence. The sensing type believes that only concrete facts matter. The intuitive type believes that vision trumps practical concerns. These one-sided positions create suffering for ourselves and conflict with others. Psychological integration involves developing what we might call functional flexibility, the ability to consciously choose which function to employ based on what a situation requires. Sometimes logical analysis is most appropriate. Other times, emotional attunement is needed. Sometimes we must focus on present details. Other times we need to imagine future possibilities. The integrated person can access all these modes appropriately. This flexibility doesn't mean becoming wishy-washy or losing our distinctive strengths. We don't abandon our natural dominant function, it remains our home base and primary strength. Rather, we develop sufficient competence with other functions that we're not imprisoned by our natural preferences. We can venture into less comfortable functional modes when circumstances demand it, then return to our natural strengths. The integration of opposites is particularly important. The real psychological work involves bridging the divide between our dominant and inferior functions. The thinking type must integrate feeling, learning that emotions and values are valid forms of intelligence, not obstacles to clear thought. The sensing type must integrate intuiting, recognizing that abstract patterns and future possibilities are real and important, not mere speculation disconnected from reality. This integration of opposites doesn't mean finding a middle ground or compromise. It's not about becoming moderately logical and moderately emotional, moderately practical and moderately visionary. Rather, it's about developing the capacity for both poles fully and knowing when each is appropriate. It's learning to hold tension between opposites rather than collapsing into one side or trying to eliminate the tension. Jung called this ability to hold opposites the transcendent function. It represents a level of consciousness that can embrace paradox and contradiction without being torn apart by it. The transcendent function allows us to recognize that life often presents dilemmas where valid principles conflict, where we must choose between two goods or two evils, where logical analysis and emotional wisdom point in different directions. In these moments, the transcendent function doesn't provide a formula for choosing. Instead, it allows us to fully acknowledge both sides, feeling the tension without rushing to resolve it prematurely. Often, if we can bear this tension long enough, a creative solution emerges that honors both perspectives in ways we couldn't have imagined from within either single function alone. This integration manifests practically in increased psychological flexibility and resilience. We're no longer thrown off balance when circumstances demand functions we're less comfortable with. We can engage in logical debate without taking disagreement personally. We can acknowledge emotions without being controlled by them. We can focus on practical details without losing sight of larger meaning. We can imagine possibilities without becoming detached from current reality. The integrated person also develops what Jung called the self, a center of personality that transcends the ego and its functional identifications. The ego identifies as, I am a logical person, or I am an emotional person. The self recognizes these as partial expressions of something larger. The self can observe all four functions operating without being identified with any single one. This development towards self often involves spiritual or contemplative practices. Meditation, for instance, develops awareness that can observe thoughts, feelings, sensations, and intuitions without being identified with them. Prayer and ritual can connect us to dimensions of experience that transcend ordinary functional consciousness. Artistic expression can integrate multiple functions simultaneously in ways that rational discourse cannot. However, transcending the functions doesn't mean leaving the human realm for some abstract spiritual plane. The most integrated people are often remarkably ordinary and practical, fully engaged with concrete life while maintaining a perspective that sees beyond immediate circumstances. They combine depth with simplicity, wisdom with humility, vision with realism. The journey toward integration is paradoxically both lifelong and already complete. It's lifelong in that we can always develop greater range and flexibility, always discover new dimensions of our neglected functions, always achieve deeper integration. Yet it's already complete in that our wholeness isn't something we must achieve, but something we already are beneath our one-sided identifications. The work is less about adding something new than about removing the barriers that obscure our inherent completeness. Understanding the four functions ultimately serves this deeper purpose. It's not about fixing ourselves or others, not about achieving perfect balance or eliminating our distinctive qualities. It's about recognizing the full richness of human consciousness, honoring all its expressions, and gradually developing the flexibility to access whatever mode of awareness is most appropriate for each situation. The truly integrated person becomes a bridge between different perspectives. They can translate between the languages of logic and emotion, between concrete and abstract, between present and future. They help others recognize validity in perspectives they naturally resist. They create spaces where diverse functional types can collaborate productively rather than talking past each other. This integration represents psychological maturity in the fullest sense. It's not about having no weaknesses or being good at everything. It's about knowing ourselves deeply, our strengths, our limitations, our blind spots, and being at peace with our humanity. It's about respecting the different ways people experience reality rather than insisting everyone should see the world as we do. It's about recognizing that consciousness itself is richer and more multifaceted than any single perspective can capture. The four functions offer us a map for this journey toward wholeness. They show us where we naturally excel and where we have room to grow. They help us understand our conflicts with others and ourselves. Most importantly, they point us toward integration, not as a final destination we'll someday reach, but as an ongoing process of becoming more fully human, more conscious, more whole. This is the ultimate gift of Jung's profound insight into the structure of human consciousness.